Hey y'all, it's Ashley at Brewing Storm and I'm back with another video. I'm definitely like feeling this look that I have. I like the lipstick and the shirt together. I didn't know how it was going to look together. I usually don't comment on what I'm wearing, but I didn't think that these two were going to work together, but they actually work together pretty well, if I say so myself. And I am here to do my mid-month wrap-up. I know that before I did not do a mid-month wrap-up in October, and my October wrap-up ended up being 58 minutes, which is super unfortunate because it was just so much to have to talk about all of those books in as much of a condensed period of time as possible, even though technically, I mean, the video was 58 minutes and I was like, I'm going to do this in 30. I definitely didn't, but to prevent that from happening again and to be able to talk about these books a little bit more in detail and give more of a full-length review like I traditionally do, I did decide to do a mid-month wrap-up for November. Unfortunately, I have not read as much as I typically do at the mid-month point because I've been super busy, but still, just to be safe, just in case the second half of the month I speed through things, I just wanted to be prepared, so I decided to split it up into two parts again. So like I said, I haven't read that much. I've only read 6 books so far as of the halfway point. There were a couple of things that I'm very close to finishing, but I'll just save those for the end of the month because I just didn't want to rush it and all that stuff. So we're just going to cover those 6 books. The first book that I ended up reading was Love Bow Taipei by Abigail Hang Wen, and this is the second time that I've actually read this book this year. The first time I read it physically, and this time when I read it, I listened to it on audio. It is about a girl by the name of Ever Wong who ends up going to Taipei, and this happens because her family wants her to follow a more traditional Chinese lifestyle, meaning that they do not want her to go to school for dance because Ever is really excited about dancing and she wants to go to NYU's Tisch School for dancing, and her parents want her to become a doctor. And honestly, throughout the novel, you really do see a lot of these battles between what would be considered more traditional and what would be considered more modern, and how that has impacted Ever's sense of her own culture and her own heritage. And it's very complex in that sense, where you see a lot of conversations about racism and the relationship between parents and kids and expectations and relationships between friendships. It's very good in the sense that the drama and just the fun aspects of this novel make it super fun. It does have its issues, it does have its problems. There's an incident that occurs between Ever and a friend, and I don't want to go into details because of the fact that it is a big part of like the second half of the book. I feel like it should not have been resolved as quickly, and I don't think that Ever should have welcomed her back so quickly. I'm not saying that Ever shouldn't have forgiven her, because I do believe in the idea of forgiveness, but I do also believe in, you know, taking your time. And I also think it would have been appropriate for Ever to say, you know what, I want to work towards forgiveness. I want to work towards accepting your apology, but I'm just not in that place right now. And what you did was so egregious. I don't know when I'm going to get to that place, because what that person did is, like, for me as a woman, there's that line that she would have crossed that I don't know how I would have even gotten through or gotten over that scenario. So that was a major issue for me within the terms of this book. I did end up giving it 4 stars because I did really enjoy it. I did like the conversations that were happening, like I said, in terms of looking at traditionalism versus like modernism, especially when you're looking specifically at a person that is trying to grapple with their identity as being Chinese, and not in the sense just of being Chinese, but also that split identity of like, okay, I don't fit in with my family that's Chinese, I don't fit in America, you know, I don't know where I'm not Chinese enough for my Chinese family, I'm not American enough for my American counterpart, so where exactly do I fit into my own personal narrative? And it was interesting because Ever even discusses like people calling her a Twinkie, which is in reference to being yellow on the outside and white on the inside. And I haven't heard that specific until reading that book, but I had heard about that, in essence, slur in terms of like black people, like being called like an Oreo, like you're black on the outside but white on the inside. And that's just a way to describe how you don't necessarily fit into one racial group or the other. And I kind of related to that. I understood where she was coming from. So I think that this book is flawed. It's not a perfect book, but it is one that I definitely did enjoy. And like I said, I enjoyed the conversations, and obviously it was good enough for me to pick up a second time. And it's one that I haven't seen a lot of people necessarily read this year, but if you're interested in it, I definitely would just kind of check out the description of it and give it a try. The next book that I ended up reading was Brewing Storm, which is the 6th book in the Booze and Brews series. I talked about the first 5 books in my October wrap up. This one was not as good. I ended up giving it 2 stars, and I was very disappointed because it is the conclusion to the series, but it almost felt like nothing happened in this book, and the relationship or the romance that we're looking at between the 2 characters is extremely bland. I think that everyone in the previous books, whether I really enjoyed them or not, tried to go with some type of thematic element, whether that was a haunting, whether that was, you know, a past relationship, whether they wanted to turn it into a thriller. This one literally had nothing spooky about it at all. It literally was the couple going to the party, and that was it. It just, to me, it just didn't do anything for me. I feel like it was dry. There was no chemistry. I didn't really understand what the attraction was between the 2 characters. And then there was a lack of editing, which was very disappointing. There were misspelled words. There were words that were left out. It was just a mess. And the fact that this was the conclusion to the series was just, I was very upset, especially since most of the books that I read out of the 5, the first 5 in the series, were well done. So I ended up giving this one 2 out of 5 stars. So the next one that I read was A Tale of Two Cities, which is a Halloween novella by Alexandra Warren. And I had this one, I meant to read this one in October, but I actually just didn't get to it, so I decided to pick it up. And it was really, really good. I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars, and it is about 2 characters by the name of Savannah and Lincoln. And it's interesting because it's a Halloween novella, but there really isn't anything necessarily spooky about it, except that it is a joint bachelorette party that takes place during Halloween, and they go to Las Vegas and there's some Halloween parties there, that type of situation. But it wasn't meant to be spooky, but I loved it because it was kind of a happy for now type of ending, and the 2 characters just had so much chemistry. As soon as they like walked into the door, there was this instantaneous attraction between the 2 of them, and they still took it slow. I think that they as adults came to this understanding that they wanted to engage in possibly a one-night stand, but I think the fact that they spent time together made them feel like maybe this could possibly turn into something more, but they weren't sure. But I did like the time that they spent together. I liked the conversations that they had. I love that Savannah was a power mover, or I don't even know the words to use to describe her, but she was a single mom that was running her own business. She was raising her daughter, who was a volleyball player? I think she was a volleyball star, and she had already gotten like scholarships and stuff, and she hadn't even graduated from high school, and she was just managing and doing all of this like on her own. And as a single mom, I like really related to that whole idea of having to juggle so many things and attempting to be successful and knowing that you can do it. And I think what I found so fascinating too is that Savannah was open to possibly having a more serious relationship, and just because she had so much on her plate, she didn't close herself off. And I think that resonated with me personally, because sometimes I think when you get used to being by yourself and you're used to handling things by yourself, especially if you're like a single parent, you're used to raising your kids by yourself, you're used to working your job, running your businesses, whatever the case may be, it becomes a very interesting dynamic because you don't feel like you need anybody. And I like that Savannah just didn't have that block like that. Oh, I don't need you to do anything for me. She was very open to the possibility of her and Lincoln starting a relationship, and I just really respected her for that. Respected her for having that characteristic, because a lot of times it's easy to get stuck in that rut and become super comfortable and then just kind of not want to open your heart to anybody. So I wish we got more from this. I really wish we got more from this, but I know that there are some characters in this book that have made appearances in other books written by Warren, so I'm going to go back and read those, which makes me really, really excited. But like I said, overall, for the most part, I did enjoy it, and I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I ended up reading was Belong to You by Ava Freeman. This is the 3rd book in the After Hours series. This is the final book in the series. There's one novella, which I'm going to end up reading, but I consider this as a series that I have completed. And this is a series that focuses on relationships between women, and they usually take place in kind of like a workplace environment. You don't have to read them in order because of the fact that they only are related in theme. I just read them in order just because, I mean, I feel like I have an A-type personality for stuff like that. Not overall, but just stuff like that. And this one is about Leilani. I think it's either Leilani or Leilani and Noel. And I wanted to love this so bad because, y'all, this is a librarian romance. I have not come across a librarian romance yet, and this was it. It was just so good in the sense that I was like, oh my gosh, this is about a librarian and a writer, and you have these 2 different personalities. One person that, and this is Noelle, who had been in a relationship with a guy, he cheated, and she was just ready to get back into dating but fearful. Totally get that. And then you have Leilani, who is a writer and has issues making commitments, but it, you know, goes a little bit into like her relationships with her mom and her sister after her dad passing, and that contributing to why she has issues with commitment and how she wants to do better and she needs to do better. And it was just such a good premise, and the chemistry and the romance scenes, everything was done so perfectly. So perfectly. I would have given this book 5 stars. I would have given it a solid 5 stars. However, the editing just did not go well at all. It did not go well. There were words that were missing. There were words that were misspelled. There was a mix-up of character names, and I was so shocked because I had read the other 2 books and I didn't have issues with the other 2 books, but I had issues with this one, and it was so heartbroken because I'd given the other 2 4 stars, and I was like, oh my gosh, this was like the best series conclusion, but I just couldn't within good conscience give it 5 stars for the amount of grammatical mistakes that I was seeing. So I'm hoping that maybe something has changed. Maybe there's a different version of this somewhere, because y'all, the story itself, outside of that stuff, the story itself is so good. It is so complex, and it would have been my favorite because I felt like Freeman definitely did a lot more deep diving into the outside factors and the inside factors that made our characters the way that they were. I feel like being able to see familial dynamics, there was even conversations about identity, especially being in a Black family and identifying as being bisexual or being a lesbian, and those conversations were great. I really loved them, and I just felt so attached to the story and so attached to the characters, which is why I think that this was such a disappointment for me, because of the fact that I was like so in love with it. I mean, I love the series, but I really, really connected to this book, and it broke my heart to give it 3 stars. It really did, y'all. It broke my heart, because had it been any other decision, I would have given it 5, hands down. But with that being said, I would recommend this trilogy. I really would recommend it because it is a great sapphic romance series that features Black women in power positions. Like, I mean, there have been women in these, I think, that were lawyers, heads of tech companies. I mean, and the romances are just so sweet, and they're very compassionate and self-fulfilling. Oh my gosh, they're just so good. So you can definitely tell, like, my heart was a little broken over that, but I did end up giving that one 3 stars. So the next book that I ended up reading was Sisters in Hate: American Women on the Front Lines of White Nationalism. I just wanted to make sure I got that title right because it's really long. This was written by Seward Darby, and this is a nonfiction book, the first nonfiction book. Whoa, how many times did I say book? That's crazy. And I'm gonna leave that in there. This is the first nonfiction book that I read for Nonfiction November, and holy crap. So I will say that this is not an easy read. This book has a heck of a lot of trigger warnings. I mean, just the blatant racism on page that happens. There's use of the N-word. There is anti-Semitic behavior, anti-feminism behavior. There's fat shaming. I mean, the list literally can go on, and you just have to be cautious in reading this book, or be very aware of your own mental health, because of the fact that this is examining white nationalism. And I did not realize prior to this book that women played such a vital role in white nationalism. And specifically, I was having a conversation with Bethany from Beautifully Bookish Bethany, and she was telling me about her experience reading this book. And then I found out that Mara from Books Like Whoa actually had also read this book, so I decided to pick it up as well. And there's so much to unpack in this book, and I don't even know if I can really unpack as much as I want to here on the camera. I did a full written review of it, so I'll make sure that I link that down below. What she does is she looks at white nationalism and she breaks it down into case studies, and she's examining 3 women that have found themselves to be a part of the white nationalist movement. Whether they are still in it or not, I won't say, because I think that's part of the aspects of the book, and reading it and really understanding how they identify at this moment. And I don't want to spoil that for you, but it really gives you insight to how women get drawn into the white nationalist movement, and then how they become vital. And a lot of that has to do with giving them a sense of purpose and making them feel like they have a vital role here on earth, especially for some of the women who are discussed in this book that have had issues with identity and figuring out their place in society and where they fit in. I think one of the most interesting things that I found out from this book is that a lot of these women actually were feminists at some point, very liberal, and they transitioned slowly. And some of them I think a little bit more aggressively than others, but they transitioned slowly into different aspects of becoming traditionalists. And I don't know if any of you have heard of the hashtag that has been popular called trad life. And trad life stands for like traditional lifestyle, where a lot of women are anti-feminist, and they believe in the idea of women being at home, taking care of the household, having kids and taking care of kids, and respecting their husbands and their husband's authority type of situation, which I don't personally agree with. I think that there is a place for traditional lifestyles if it is consenting on both sides, but I don't think that every woman has to aspire to live in that lifestyle if they don't choose to. And I don't think there's any wrong with not wanting to do that, or with wanting to do it, as long as it is a means of consent. But even there are women who are trad life that are not white nationalists, but I did not realize that trad life has become a gateway for white nationalism, because a lot of white nationalist men believe that white women are the future for the white race, in which they're responsible for carrying on their legacy by having children, and they should be subservient, and they should be at home, they should be homemakers, and they shouldn't be activists and speaking out. And it is a very interesting conversation. So I do think that one of the most interesting figures within this movement definitely is Lana Lockteff, and she is the most vocal in the white nationalist movement in terms of women who are involved in it. And she and her husband run a media company called Red Ice. And I think what was so interesting in reading a lot about Lana Lockteff is the fact that a lot of men in the white nationalist movement do not like that Lana is so outspoken, and they feel like she is definitely just doing more than what she's supposed to do. And she is advocating for women to have a voice and to carve out a space in the white nationalist movement, or the alt-right is another term. And I find that very reminiscent of feminists who want to carve out spaces for women in male dominated places. So it was just a very contradictory conversation that was happening. But I've watched some videos of Lana, and the reason why I recognize Lana's name as well is because Bree, who used to be a booktuber, her name, I believe, is on BookTube was Brie Fauché, whatever. Well, back in like 2015, she had made a video talking about how much she hated diversity, and we blew up. I mean, the BookTube community blew up, and it ended up being a situation where we ended up getting a couple of readathons out of the fact that we had someone in the community that hated diversity, and she became a member of the alt-right, and she became a white supremacist. And I didn't even realize that it was her because she apparently used a different name in the book. There was a different name for her in the book, and I only knew that it was her because of the fact that I recognized the title of the book that the author had said Bree had written. And I was like, I think that's Bree's book, if I'm not mistaken, because she was having the BookTube community actually read her book and review her book. So I Googled it and I wanted to make sure, and it was her. And I said, oh, that's fascinating that a person within her own community ended up becoming a white nationalist. So for me, I think it kind of verified the idea that white nationalism can encroach in any social circle or any arena, and they have tactics and ways to recruit and then radicalize. But I do believe that if you're interested in learning more about the relationship between white women and white nationalism, this is definitely a very good book to read. I do want to warn you, like I said in the beginning, because I just want to reiterate that this is not an easy book to read. It is not a comfortable book to read. It is actually super uncomfortable to read, and I hope that you make sure that you are in a space to read this book. It's short, it's not hard to make it through in terms of length, but content, you need to take care of yourself. Definitely take care of yourself, because there is some very, very hateful rhetoric in this book that was even difficult for me to get through it at times, and at times when I just had to pause and kind of take a break from it because it was too triggering. But I did end up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. Like I said, if this is kind of the content that you're interested in, I would recommend kind of looking into this book. Okay, y'all, so the last book that I read for the month of November was Fear, Trump in the White House by Bob Woodward, and this was such an interesting book. I've had a couple people tell me like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you made it through that book. I can't believe you finished that book. It really wasn't as bad, I think, as people are thinking in terms of difficulty in making it through it, because while I definitely could only take Trump in a certain number of doses, I think that this book actually provides some really interesting insight to the emotional and mental things that have gone on with that past administration, and I found it just very fascinating. Now, the content itself, like a lot of the events that that happen within the context of this are events that you probably have heard of because they had been broadcast on all the major news stations. So don't be surprised by that at all. But I think what was fascinating is that I truly did not realize how much Trump did not know just about the foundation of American politics. I mean, I knew he didn't know. It's kind of one of those common sense things, like he just doesn't know. But the length and the reasoning behind a lot of major issues just was mind-blowing to kind of hear his logic. And for me personally, it felt like a lot of it was coming from a place of Trump trying to run, America like a business, and having no knowledge of economics, of our trade policies, of foreign policies, of tax, of tax reform, or just having any knowledge whatsoever about what you can and cannot do, and how the powers, our 3 powers, check each other, and that you can't just get in there and do whatever you want to do. It was very fascinating, and I was very intrigued by the relationship that Trump had with Bannon and both Lindsey Graham. And I think Lindsey Graham does get a lot of criticism because of the fact that I believe right before the election, this could have been in either 2015 or early 2016, you know, he even went as far as to interview with Trevor Noah and said that if you vote for Trump, you're voting for a racist and a bigot, and, you know, you are not safe if you fit into certain categories with him as president. And a lot of that I feel like too, because I didn't realize that Lindsey Graham had actually thrown his hat into the arena to run for president, and he was in the Republican primaries. I don't think he made it that far because I think it just ended very, very quickly. And him and Trump had this argument or disagreements, and Trump gave his telephone number out at a rally, and it just led to some very intense beef, for lack of a better terms, between the two of them. So I think people watch Lindsey Graham very carefully because of the fact that how did he go from hating Donald Trump so much to all of a sudden they're like best buddies. I was telling someone I felt like Lindsey Graham became a fan of Trump, not because necessarily because Trump has something on him, which I thought for a long time, which could still be true. But I think that for some politicians, Trump's stupidity was a gateway for them to be able to move and shake things that they wanted to do without being in a position of power. And that definitely for me resonated with Lindsey Graham, who has political ambitions to be president, but it did not get, you know, put on the ticket. And when he becomes super, super close to Trump, he's able to talk to Trump and get in Trump's ear. And, you know, from what I was hearing from what Bob was writing within the context of this book, there were moments when like Trump was calling Graham at 12 o'clock in the morning, asking him questions and asking him for guidance. And it was a very interesting book, and you can see just how misguided Trump was in running, you know, his office, not just in terms of the fact that he said some extremely racist and bigoted and insensitive things, but also just on just public policy in general, like he had no knowledge whatsoever of anything. He didn't understand that there were certain things that the American government was invested in, not only for our own protection, but also to stabilize everyone from being in a world war, and that certain things were happening in terms of trading because it was bringing us in an influx of money, and that it wasn't always about, well, how come we're paying more and they're not paying anything, because the long-term effects was what a lot of people were looking at. So I think in his administration, he had people who were trying to get things done that were very, very frustrated with him and just literally could not stand him. That's why you see that his cabinet did not last. I mean, people were getting fired, people were quitting, and from what I think the numbers say, a third of his cabinet has ended up in prison. So you have to really consider the fact that he just really had no political knowledge, and the level in which he exuded stupidity had no end. And just really watching the relationships that he had with people was very weird. I mean, there were even points when they couldn't even put an actual full-length memo on this man's desk because he wouldn't read it. He wouldn't read it at all. They had to condense memos down to a page. If it went over, it could only be a page and a half because they knew that he would not engage with the content of the memo and read it in its entirety, and that he was immature. Like whenever he signed paperwork, he felt he was getting stuff done because he was signing stuff, and that made him, you know, big man. And you know, a lot of this stuff, it's funny. It's not truly funny because it is our nation that's on the line because of this crap, but it's funny because I don't understand how people agree with his politics when he really doesn't have any. He repeats what he's fed, and then when he's confronted with being wrong is when he goes off the deep end and he just says wild stuff. You know, in the book they were talking about how North Korea was saying that they had a missile on their desk and they were, you know, push the missile at any time. And Trump went and tweeted, "I have a missile on my desk and it's much bigger than yours and it actually works." And it's like, first of all, that's not something that you put on social media. second of all, that's not something that you engage in as head of state. Like, you just don't. You don't compete with language like that, putting everyone in this world at jeopardy over tweets. It's stupid. It's so stupid that it feels unreal that someone like this was actually elected as an official of this country, like the most powerful position that you could have in the world. And I think for him right now, and looking at everything in relation to the 2020 election, this is about power. And I think Bob tried to capture that narrative that Trump is very so much about power and control, and feeling like it's his right to be in power, and that no one is going to take that away from him. And that's why we're seeing that struggle right now. And it is the most disappointing thing to see the framework of the democracy of a country kind of come down to this I guess this is a temper tantrum, because I can't even find the words to really describe it. But I think that Bob does capture all of it. This doesn't go all the way through his presidency. This stops at right before the investigation into the Russian collusion stuff begins. So this doesn't even talk about his impeachment or anything like that. But you can see how Trump has racked up some enemies, and you can see the way that he treats people. I did not realize how much people hate it, like within the cabinet, hated Kushner and Ivanka. But I mean, it makes sense. I mean, all of it makes sense. So I ended up giving this one 3.5 because, like I said, a lot of it was stuff that I already knew. And honestly, if you're not into politics, there's a lot of discussion on a lot of like nitty-gritty aspects of politics, whether that's foreign policy. It's a lot of discussion about us invading Iraq and Afghanistan. There's a lot of conversations about tax reform, and there's a lot of political science-y type things going on. A lot of analysis of just like governmental structure. So if you're not into that, I don't know how much you would really enjoy it, except for like the entertaining tidbits where Trump just goes batshit crazy. But I really don't know. I don't know how much you would enjoy it, but I definitely did give it a 3.5 stars. Alright, y'all, so that is it. That is all I have for you in terms of my mid-month wrap-up. I'm glad I actually did do a mid-month wrap-up, because those last two books being nonfiction, it's just a lot for me to talk about. In terms of what I'm reading now, I'm actually reading Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse right now. I have officially started that. I have also started a nonfiction book about Wonder Woman, which is, I believe, The Secret History of Wonder Woman. I'll make sure I definitely put a picture of that stuff up here so you can actually see it. Outside of those two audiobooks, I think that I'm actually going to get a physical copy of Black Sun as well, because listening to it on audio is a lot of characters in this book, which I didn't realize, which is cool, but I didn't realize it. I think that I'm probably going to try to finish up Night of the Mannequin sometime soon. And then I think one of my other nonfiction books that I really want to start is probably going to be Medical Apartheid. Like I said, that's not one that I think I'm going to finish this month, but it is one that I need to go ahead and start. Alright, y'all, so in the comments below, let me know what you have read so far in the month of November, if you've enjoyed your reading. As always, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button, and as always, I'll be back with another video soon.